Hi, welcome to the Leaderonomics Show. My name is Sarah, and today we have with us Brendon Rennels. Welcome to the show, Brendon.
Thanks, Sarah.
Now, Brendon, you are a teacher development manager at Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute, right? Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about your background, what you graduated in, and how you got to where you are today.
Great, yeah. So I graduated from the University of Michigan, and that was actually where I also took my first mindfulness course. So it was a class at the university, and it was taught by this really wonderful professor. And in the class, we sat in a circle and we shared just more about our experience and how we were relating to difficult emotions in our lives or the kind of pressure of school and graduation. And I felt like it planted a seed for me in being able to relate to my experience in a way that had elements of mindfulness, which we're looking at around kindness and curiosity. And that really it planted a seed in me. And at the time I was in the business school, I went off after graduation and worked as a corporate consultant in Dubai, doing management consulting, and I was traveling a lot and making a bunch of money and kind of living the life that I thought would really bring me happiness if I was successful at. And I was fortunate just a few years into consulting to feel like I had kind of made certain successes, but then have this sense of, I think there's got to be something more, like really more deeper fulfillment beyond just living for the weekend or for vacations or something, but really trying to move more towards making my passion more of my livelihood. And so that kind of process then initiated a shift where I spent a number of years then practicing at mindfulness centers and learning more about this thing that started at university, and then cultivated it more and more, and then found Search Inside Yourself, which is really bringing these two together, finding a way that these ancient practices around mindfulness and compassion can be relevant to people wherever they are in their working world.
Okay, maybe you could tell us a little bit more about what mindfulness is exactly, and how would it look like if someone were to apply this in their lives in general?
Yeah, it's great. So there's many definitions and ways to think about mindfulness or practice mindfulness, and the definition that we use in the SIYLI program is the awareness of the body, the mind, and the external environment with an attitude of curiosity and kindness. So we're bringing attention into the present moment, and we're being aware of what's happening in the moment in my body, in my mind, and in the environment. And that awareness with an attitude, a specific kind of attitude of curiosity and kindness. And so both of those together, I think, can manifest in many different ways. We might think of mindfulness is this kind of thing where you're really calm and you're measured and you're walking slowly, but it doesn't have to be like that. So in the midst of our daily lives, when things are busy and there's stress or deadlines or difficult people, that we can also bring a sense of awareness to that, of what am I experiencing? Oh, I'm experiencing frustration or confusion or that kind of things.
Self-awareness?
So it's building in that element with that attitude. And so it's important that it's not just you're bringing both. So you're aware, even in difficult situations, wow, I'm experiencing something challenging, let me be aware of that with a certain kind of attitude. And that can facilitate a shift.
Okay. And what about, so you're kind of like a teacher of teachers, as a teacher development manager. How do you think that your background in mindfulness kind of complements your teaching abilities?
Yeah, well, to me, particularly in this kind of program and environment of Search Inside Yourself, I think the mindfulness is really the core of the teaching itself. And so I think that there's an element of kind of an individual getting out of the way. Like the practice works. And so if you can explain it and hold a container for people where they feel safe to step into experimenting in a new way with their emotions, that creating that container leads to transformation. And so it's helped me to shift from thinking that as a teacher I need to do something, or like I have the knowledge and let me give it to you, that isn't actually as effective as, it's not just that, oh, it's nicer to create space, it's actually more effective when you're creating space for an environment and then just helping to facilitate that shift versus feeling like you need to be the one making a difference.
Right. So it's very experiential kind of learning,
Yes.
very hands-on.
Yes.
Nice.
Yeah, very much so. You're giving people tools and resources, because however good of an idea mindfulness is, if I explain it and I have this data and science and these famous people who also practice, that goes in the head and that might sound like a good idea, but where it really makes a difference is if you actually begin to practice and see for yourself, wow, when I relate to my experience in this way, I really feel a transformation of difficulty and suffering. And that transformation is what's going to inspire people to keep practicing.
I see. And earlier you talked a little bit about how people have a certain perception towards mindfulness. Maybe you could tell us what it's not so we can identify that a little better?
Yeah, for sure. Mindfulness is not. Yeah, it's not a lot of things. I think a common misconception is that people think that mindfulness is about clearing your thoughts or not having any thoughts. And that there's some way in which that's what you're trying to do, which in actuality, this practice is really about being aware of what's happening in the present moment, right? In the mind, in the body, in the environment. And sometimes what's happening is my thoughts are all over the place. But what happens is with enough practice, you gain some stability in your attention so that when the mind wanders off, as it often does, and starts planning or worrying or fantasizing or ruminating, that instead of being totally lost in it, you have some stability to see more space around it.
So you're really in the present.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to take a short break.
Great.
And when we get back, we're going to talk about mindfulness and how that translates to being a great leader. Hi, welcome back to the Leaderonomics Show. I'm Sarah here, and we're here with Brendon Rennels from Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute. So Brendon, I understand that Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute strives to teach people tools for compassion, for empathy and wisdom. Do you think that these are attributes that are very important for a leader to have, and why?
Yeah. One of the first things we do in the Search Inside Yourself program is ask people to think of an outstanding leader in their life. So someone that they've worked with currently or worked with in the past that's an outstanding leader. And what we consistently find over and over and over again is the qualities that people name of outstanding leaders are things like empathy, compassion, integrity, willingness to support the team. These things that you might think of as soft skills in some way are actually the attributes that really differentiate just good leaders from outstanding leaders.
Very interesting that you mentioned soft skills. So I understand that here we try not to categorize them as soft or hard skills, but they're just parts of you know, what leadership really is. Nice.
Yeah, there's a way in which I think the skill sets of integrating, I mean, a manager needs to be competent, so a leadership, like having the skills to do the job is important for sure. But what is separating those who are then outstanding are these elements around, can they motivate a team? Can they create an environment where the people in the team feel safe to be honest if things are behind or if they're struggling or confused? That container requires trust. And that requires them feeling like, hey, it's safe for me to admit and be vulnerable that I made a mistake, and you're not going to jump on me for it, or I might be punished for it.
Correct, because that really helps people grow and learn from their mistakes.
For sure, and to feel safe. It's like to be able to be creative and innovate. You know, creativity is such a, like innovation is something that a lot of companies are looking at, even traditional like manufacturing and other places where they're seeing the world is changing, technology is really changing how we operate, but you know, it's one thing for a corporate leadership board to say, hey, innovation is important and creativity is important, but you better meet all these deadlines or else you're going to be in trouble. Like, you know, people don't feel safe to make a really creative idea if they feel like they're not going to be, if it's not safe for them to do so. So that container of safety, I think, is paramount in creative and high-performing teams.
Awesome. So you spent a year with the Wake Up Tour. That was with the Nobel Prize nominee and Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh. We want to know if you could tell us one leadership lesson or nugget that you would have learned from him in that time.
Yeah. So there's many things that I feel like I learned during that time, and probably the most valuable insight I got was during there was a moment where he was offering kind of advice and perspective, and there was this ceremony, the Vietnamese New Year, called Tet, which is this kind of like Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's all into one holiday and celebration. And as a part of that, he would sometimes give, it's kind of like perspective and advice to people that had questions. And I was chosen to go up and to have him be able to receive and share some guidance to me in front of like 500 people. So it was this huge audience of people and all of these monks and nuns in this big hall, and I go up and he had me ask a question, and I didn't actually know that you were supposed to ask a question when you went up, but he handed me the microphone and I was like, wow. And he said, you know, what's your question? I was like, wow, yeah, it was this real kind of Zen moment of, okay, what do you want to know? What's most on your heart? So I wasn't preparing or thinking of, and what was on my heart was, you know, how do I take these skills that I've learned here at the monastery in this setting into the real world or the outside world or the world where,
very good question.
Yeah, it's not as contained. And he said a lot of things in response, but what I heard most clearly was, he said, sometimes things happen and we think of them as good. And sometimes things happen and we think of them as bad.
Yeah.
Look deeper. Everything that happens can be an opportunity for you to develop in your peace and your compassion.
That's very wise.
Yeah. And so I think about the application of that is thinking of, in terms of a leadership or a business setting, there are things that happen that you really can't control. You know, even the CEO of a huge company has so many things that is out of her or his control.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so what's most important is, how do we respond to things that don't go the way that we have planned? And there are ways in which we can respond that are healthy and are more likely to lead to beneficial outcomes. And there are ways that we can respond which are not so healthy. And that ability to look deeper requires you to get out of the story of this happened and that happened and move more into, what is it from this situation that I can allow myself to develop in these skills that are important to me? And
that's very applicable in a very stressful moment, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah, when you think, oh no, like something, even this idea that something has gone wrong, like that can be an idea which really feeds on itself and makes things challenging for you and those around you. But to be able to, and it's not about denying a difficult situation. It's not like, oh, well, that was bad and whatever, I won't think about it, or like, oh, it wasn't so bad. It's really taking and being able to say, wow, actually, the things that I most grow from are the things that often are challenging.
Yeah,
and so when I can incorporate that into my life and my experience in a way that requires some courage and actual vulnerability in facing challenges, that doing that with an open mind and open heart is likely to be helpful for not only you, but everyone around you as well.
Okay, thank you, Brendon. We're going to take a short break before we come back and get some more leadership nuggets from Brendon. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Hi, welcome back to the Leaderonomics Show with Brendon Rennels from Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute. So Brendon, we've talked a lot about mindfulness and about how that relates to leadership and what makes a good leader different from a great leader, or vice versa. So I'm very curious, what do you think are the visible changes that we should be able to see if an organization, and I'm talking about the entire organization, right?
Yeah.
Not just the leaders, but their employees as well. If they were to practice the art of mindfulness in their day-to-day life, like what would that look like?
The first thing that comes up is how great would it be if an organization with thousands and thousands of employees were practicing mindfulness? I feel like that's a beautiful aspiration. To me, I think there's probably many layers to think about it, but probably on the kind of practical day-to-day, I'd imagine that an organization where it's more and more in the kind of ethos of the organization and the vision is you probably have practical things like meetings probably start and end on time.
Okay, that would be great.
Right?
Yeah.
People that when something comes up in a meeting that kind of sidetracks people or has an emotional content, that it's kind of named and not hidden, but also it doesn't take over the meeting, right? Sometimes that there's an element of when we're getting together that sometimes something comes up and it sidetracks us, or there's something that people don't mention that's really kind of the elephant in the room. So I think there's some of that in terms of group dynamics.
And that's because people feel they can trust the people around them,
for
right?
Sure.
Like what you mentioned earlier.
Trust is, I feel like that's a huge part.
Yeah.
Then I think from a kind of job perspective, I would imagine that there's more people that are in jobs and doing positions that they actually feel alive by doing. So there's more engagement in the actual work. Yeah. Because part of what I think happens when you begin to practice more is you begin to see, what do I really enjoy doing? Like, what brings me alive? And then trying to find more activities which align with that.
I see. And
so I think in a work environment, if you imagine a company where everybody who is there really wants to be there. Yeah. Not just because they're getting paid for it, or they don't have other options, or they're looking to further their career progression, but they're actually excited when they wake up about what they're going to do that day. Yeah. And I feel like that would shift the entire environment. That would shift how people relate to their customers. That would relate to how people relate to just people on their team, their managers. I feel like it could make a big difference.
A very self-aware kind of environment.
Yeah, and it's important to also recognize that doesn't mean there's not conflict. Yeah. Because we're human beings. Yeah. And so part of mindfulness is also not just not having things come up or always being calm, but being able to take ownership for our own feelings and our own judgments, and being able to find healthy and skillful ways to communicate and work with that in a group of people.
Sure. And I'm sure this kind of thing doesn't happen overnight, when companies want to kind of change their culture to be, more like this. So in your experience, what's the good news? How long would it usually take?
Well, I think it's kind of, people read about Google and other places and they think, wow, Google's really successful and they did mindfulness, so maybe we'll do a program and we can be successful like that. And it takes a while. But it's interesting because there's also a sense that it actually doesn't take any time at all. Because mindfulness, as much as it's about the promise of transformation and change in behavior and outcomes, it's actually ultimately not about getting anywhere. It's really about fully inhabiting where we are now. And doing that with the attitude of curiosity and kindness. So bringing in an awareness of our experience. And so actually, sometimes people go to a 2-day program and then that is like a shift is ready to happen. And it doesn't have to just be a search inside yourself program. Maybe they attend a class or they read a book and just some shift happens. And in that shift, then how they relate to their work changes. And so there's 2 answers. I think one is it takes a long time to see real long-lasting change. And I think the other is you don't have to wait until everybody is practicing an hour a day in order to see a shift.
So I guess people just need to be reminded, if a leader would want to lead their company towards something like that, it's just leading by example and reminding people.
People often take the SIY program and then say, like, my boss needs to take this program, or like my team needs to take this or whatever. And I think, Yeah, for sure, it's valuable for more and more people to have access, but there's also, in my experience, the most powerful way that we can influence other people is through our own embodiment and presence.
Absolutely.
Like, people can feel if we are hiding or holding emotion in some way, and people can also feel if there's a real sense of groundedness and openness.
Yeah.
And so that, in my experience, is really what helps allow for and facilitate transformation.
All right. So I've got two last questions before we finish. If you could give any kind of leadership advice to a fresh graduate, what would that be?
A fresh graduate.
Yeah.
Thing that comes up is to trust yourself.
You want to explain a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. I think at the beginning of your career, there's a sense of a lot of possibility and a lot of options, hopefully, maybe, for yourself of different ways you could go. And there's also a sense of maybe what you got your degree in and maybe what your parents want you to do or what society wants you to do and all these kinds of things.
Yeah.
And I also think that there's a lot of wisdom that we all have in ourselves to choose and to find what it is that brings us most alive.
Yeah.
And so I think having a sense of your own trust in, even if you are thinking of something or some idea that you feel like is possible from a business perspective or a non-business perspective, but it could be like a new product or a technology or a use of a technology that feels like it's exciting to you, but nobody else is doing it or talking about it, to try and explore that. I feel like a lot of entrepreneurs and people that are successful in trying new things trusted not in just what other people said was possible, but some sense of their own inner, like, this feels important. And so whether or not you're starting your own company or you're working for somebody else, some sense of what is it that I really care about, and can I trust in that and try to make decisions that align what I'm doing with that inner sense of guidance and importance.
Okay, and my very last question. What about if it was for a CEO, you know, someone who's so experienced, has some kind of leadership background?
Yeah.
Well, we're still learning, so what would your advice be to that kind of person?
Yeah. To me, it would be, if you're in a leadership position, there's research around the importance of psychological safety within a team environment. So Google did this big study called Project Aristotle and looked at all of these different teams among all different kinds of departments. And what they found was the number one component of high functioning teams was psychological safety. That people felt able to take risks and be vulnerable in front of each other. And so as a CEO, as someone who's really in a position to influence other people, the more that we can create an environment, and not an artificial one, but a real environment where we are allowing for safety within the team, which also requires you to have safety within yourself.
Yeah.
So a sense of really not just attacking yourself for mistakes or difficulties, but really allowing for a sense of spaciousness.
Yeah.
I think that is more likely to inspire your team and cultivate a desire in them to really go the extra mile for you, not because they're afraid of criticism or they're wanting a bigger paycheck, but because they actually can feel that you really care.
Yeah.
And that sense of care, I think, is what's really going to take whatever project you're working on to the next level.
Awesome. All right, so that's all the time we have. It's been great having you on the show, Brendon. Thank you.
It's been great being here.
Yeah. And thanks for watching, everybody. This has been the Leaderonomics Show with Brendon Rennels.
Thank you.